The benefit
Rachel
is to
speaking. You
set
said a
the
lot,
cat
let Rachel
amongst
speak.
the pigeons, Roxy.
Listen, don't
That
speak
is
like
all
that,
I have
Harriet,
to
because
say.
You've said a lot and Rachel was just speaking, so give her a moment, please.
The Traitors is back for season 4, and I think it is the best season so far. It is also the most chaotic season, you may have noticed. On the one hand, they brought in a lot of new rules. There's a secret traitor, there's a chance to talk to the traitors, there's this dagger that gives you a second vote. I've said in the past this show will start to grow very stale very soon if it doesn't find a way to rework the format, and whilst all these changes are technically small gimmicks, it has definitely helped in the short term, as has how generally all over the place the dynamics have been. We have seen a lot of players crash themselves out of this game, either by making bad mistakes or else just completely going off the wall at certain points, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The Traitors is a psychological game show in which 20 odd contestants enter a castle as faithfuls, apart from 3 of them who are secretly picked to play as the Traitors, and their job is to every night choose one contestant to murder or eliminate from the show, and then every evening all of the contestants meet around the round table and vote on one player to be banished based on who they think the traitors are. All the contestants are slowly whittled down until in the final, all the remaining players then split the prize money. However, if there are any traitors in the final, they take all the money for themselves. Spoilers for the UK Traitors Season 4. I am a therapist. I've already released one video about this season a few days ago, and now here is this one. So just to make it clear, 9 episodes of this season are out at the time of recording this. My last video talked quite a bit about episodes 8 and 9. This video is going to go back earlier into the show to look at what I found most interesting. Also, something's going wrong with my PC at the moment while editing this. It keeps crashing when I try to do too much, so instead of lots of the usual clips from the Traitors edited throughout this, you're going to just get a Dave's Walks background with some of the necessary clips in the moments I need to show examples. I know a lot of you prefer Dave's Walks backgrounds anyway, and the link's below for his channel and to this original video, which is a walk of Paul Pero, but it is worth me just explaining that. I said a lot of the contestants got themselves banished, or at least definitely damaged their own game in bad ways, and the first example of that is obviously Hugo. Hugo is a traitor. All of the traitors agree to murder the contestant Ben, and so in the morning, once they all realise Ben has gone, talk immediately turns to what Ben's last words were, that he thinks Ross is a traitor, and if he is now murdered after saying it, either Ross or someone else in that room must be a traitor. That's what he suggested, that's the theory they're all keen to discuss until Hugo interrupts, wanting to have a moment to remember Ben, basically.
Well, guys, before we do that, can we just have a moment? That senior gentleman was giving absolutely everything. Whoever has done that is beyond mean.
And for a lot of reasons you can easily tell for yourselves, this is a bad move. It's also very bad acting that makes him look insincere. Why would anyone be feigning sadness over Ben's murder unless they were a traitor? There's nothing this early in the game to suggest Hugo and Ben were close. It quite obviously looks very traitorous and unsurprisingly gets him banished, but we have seen faithfuls do things like this in the past in a very sincere and genuine way. I remember Kaz once raising a toast in Season 3, and this then becoming a core reason he was banished. And so the thing I want to highlight is that whilst this example does feel like a very traitorous thing to do, and they're totally correct about that, it's not always just about that in these kind of examples. Sometimes it's simply how different the behaviour is to everyone else. You know, out of sync with what the general group habits and customs have been, what the unspoken subconscious rules and etiquette of the group is. No one has been taking moments to remember contestants like this before. It is very different to what everybody else is doing, and not only does that immediately draw attention towards you at a time this early on when nobody else has really much other evidence to go on, but also in terms of the group dynamics themselves, it isolates you, it divides you from everyone else, in a very small but perhaps influential way. And if Hugo is a tenuous example for that idea, let's explore the madness of Fiona. Fiona and Rachel are both traitors. Amanda, who is a faithful, trusts Rachel and tells her in confidence that she is an ex-detective in the Metropolitan Police. And then, after Amanda is banished, Rachel decides to tell everyone this fact. Amanda was an ex-detective, she is skilled at catching criminals, and therefore when she told us she thought Jade, Sam, whoever the other one was that she thought was a traitor, we should take her opinion seriously. She knows her stuff. At the time Rachel revealed this, fellow traitor Stephen was under a bit of heat. And so this is quite a clever move, I think, to draw attention off of him and onto Jade and Sam instead. However, Fiona didn't like this move. Fiona thinks Rachel is lying, and as far as the show suggests at least, the main reason for this seems to be that Fiona had told Amanda that all her family were ex-police, and so if Amanda was a former detective, why didn't she tell me? Why did she just tell you, Rachel? I don't believe she would do that, therefore I think you're lying.
I question why she would have told you, knowing all my background. Half my family are coppers, and you came down gleefully.
You don't think that she sat me in there and told...
So, I believe that Rachel is a traitor.
Secondly, Fiona seems to not like what she repeatedly calls the gleeful expression with which Rachel shared this news. And I mean, I think you would be smiling when you're revealing such an interesting, gossip-worthy twist. I don't think a gleeful expression, if you're going to call it that, is really that bad a thing. But I think we can kind of speculate based on this that Fiona took this quite personally, interpreted Rachel's gleeful expression as bragging, as I was told something special, but you weren't, Fiona, you were left out type of thing, which it clearly isn't. But this is what can happen in a stressful, pressurized enough group environment. You lose perspective, you lose all the space to step out of the game and put your anxieties elsewhere or calm them or whatever. These are the only people they interact with for several weeks. No phones, they're not even allowed a clock to know what time of day it is. In that kind of highly stressful environment where you're all constantly being taught to second guess each other over everything, suddenly all sorts of personal feelings and insecurities from your internal world would rise to the surface in ways they normally wouldn't, and then you can get this kind of school playground feel going on here, or it's more likely to get that. I think a secondary factor is that Fiona was the secret traitor. She missed the first several days to bond with the other traitors and only came in after Hugo was banished, after she quite publicly and readily went against Hugo, and I think this puts her in a more precarious position with Stephen and Rachel, who are two very close traitors. They're perhaps the most united we've seen two traitors, at least for this consistently long so far. Fiona's argument was Rachel is lying about this Amanda thing as a way to turn on Stephen. She says she's worried Rachel is turning on Stephen, this is all a ploy to get him voted out, even though all of what Rachel does is precisely to protect Stephen. Her argument doesn't make much sense logically, but I think it potentially portrays a faint insecurity here that she's not as close to them as they are to each other. She feels kind of the third spare part in this group. And so isolating Rachel, who she already feels has been bragging about her closer friendships to others than Fiona has, isolating her and drawing herself closer to Stephen, positioning herself like his more loyal protector, so that they become the two core traitors and Rachel is the one feeling on the outside. And we don't know for certain that's what is going on here. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of stuff that got left out of the edit when we see the show. I imagine there are other factors to this. And I don't think you can ever make this kind of speculation accurately with such little information when you can't even talk to them and ask them about it. However, it's still a good example for the kind of ways transference and countertransference can work in group dynamics. Fiona interpreted events very subjectively based on her internal feelings, and it kind of caused everything to spiral out of control here. This is the kind of thing that happens a lot in high pressure groups, far more often than you imagine, no matter who you are. And it causes Fiona to immediately be banished. Again, for many obvious reasons, but also because it puts her at a huge distance to the rest of the group. She is suddenly behaving totally outside the unspoken yet firmly established norms of this group, and that makes her feel like part of an out group. Whether or not there's any objective reason to see her behaviour here as traitorous or suspicious, the more someone is in an out group, the more naturally suspicious you start to see them as being. And we can say the same about Harriet. Harriet was a faithful who was very forcefully and publicly arguing that Rachel was a traitor. Like Fiona, Harriet went all in on it. I am a psychological crime writer who understands deception. I am an ex-barrister. Trust me when I say Rachel is a traitor. I think the fact her own eloquence had been a big factor in what previously got Hugo banished meant Harriet came into this with much more confidence that she was just going to be believed on all of it. And when she was struggling to convince the others, she said, in fact, banish me if you want. When I'm proven a faithful, it will only seal Rachel's fate even more. You can then finally banish her out. And it's achieved nothing. Nobody voted for Rachel the following evening. Nobody took it at all seriously. Harriet got herself banished for absolutely no reason. Why? Well, again, there are a lot of factors, but the specific factor this video is focusing on is behaving too out of character from the rest of the group, behaving too differently. Harriet is very genuinely angry about the traitors, mainly about Rachel, and I don't know entirely where this anger is coming from. I suspect her barrister and crime writer background does motivate her to play things up for television. I expect that is a factor. The more dramatic she can be here, the more effective it is for her brand as a writer. However, the game has gotten under her skin, or at least appears to have done so. She is genuinely angry. She interrupts a more rounded discussion at breakfast to declare Rachel a traitor. When Roxy tries to draw her back because as a group they'd all agreed to wait until later before discussing the events of last night, Harriet talks over the top of her, isn't really interested in what the group have collectively decided, appears kind of rude, refuses to talk to Rachel later on.
Harriet, can we talk?
No, I've got nothing to say to you.
I said, can we talk? I've got nothing to say to you.
That seems very overdramatic. She's in a court of law.
Being rude to people doesn't sit right with me whatsoever.
What you've done there is sort of ostracize yourself out of righteous anger. Roxy, for example, is then immediately reticent to trust what Harriet is saying because she now feels offended by Harriet's rudeness towards her. Many of them, I would suspect, feel a bit sorry for Rachel for how forcefully and unexpectedly she had been attacked. And let's also mention points that I think relate to both the Hugo and the Fiona examples too. They very suddenly appeared to take this game incredibly seriously, appeared to have a more intense emotional reaction than the general group vibe. Hugo was of course acting, but nonetheless, this sudden righteous anger about Ben's death, come on, we're all having fun here trying to suss out the killer. I mean, imagine acting like that in a murder party with some friends, you know? Fiona behaving in a way that might remind them of school playground conflicts, Harriet playing up her role here like well, like she's a prosecutor. It's very fun to watch, and I don't want this to sound at all like I'm criticising anyone having emotional reactions in this show, because it's designed to bring that out. All of the contestants get very emotional at different points and in different ways. It's entirely natural. However, it does also make a contestant an easy target for projection in those moments, let's say. So when someone does have a more extreme outburst, it's easy to subconsciously project your own stress and own emotional reactions onto them, so you can then step back and be like, why are they taking this so seriously? It's only a game. Damn, way to be a mood killer. The Traitors is kind of a trap in that way. A game designed to be incredibly emotionally intense. I've talked in the past about why this game would be so intense. But also one where extreme reactions and behaviour make you a target. What Rachel does very well in response to both of these extreme attacks is never to get too drawn in by the intensity. She retaliates, but not with the same anger, not personal defensiveness, mostly composed, mostly behaving as though she does still treat this all like it's a game, playing the kind of almost baffled and amused by their outbursts. And that kind of response aligns her much more with the other contestants. You can then kind of isolate Fiona and Harriet by going, why are you being so intense? I find that so weird. We all know it's just a game. I mean, obviously she doesn't say that and there's a lot more going on, but you kind of get the idea. By keeping her behaviour and emotions more in line with what the rest of the group is at the time, it places Fiona or Harriet on the outside. You can more play up their emotional difference to the rest of the group. Whereas I think if Rachel had dropped down to the same level as them and started all of the kind of screaming you constantly get in the US version, it would then be a higher chance to place both of them on the outside, Harriet as well as Rachel, or Fiona as well as Rachel. And I think the faithful may then have been more likely to banish both of them. Also, coming back to Harriet, when you're doing this at breakfast and you say you're not going to share your evidence yet, you're going to wait until the round table, but until then, all of you trust me, she is definitely a traitor. Not only are you then depending so much on personal trust, but also you're setting up a massive anticlimax, because the evidence you give is never going to be as big as the build-up here, and never as big as your initial drama. And so when you do give it, I think that natural sense of anticlimax inevitably then makes your argument feel less compelling. Under enough stress, people in group dynamics can tend to seek out similarity, familiarity, predictability in order to lessen the stress. The more familiar and less uncertain you can make your group feel, the less there is to worry about, the less to wonder about, the less stress. And doing that often means isolating, banishing, eradicating any form of difference. Putting people who are different in out-groups where you can then be an in-group of sameness. Almost always this never works, because once those people have been othered, you realise the stress is still there and you now need a new target to blame and ostracize. This is not an effective way to manage stress at all, but I think it's probably one reason older contestants are almost always banished or murdered very early on. It is also likely a reason minority contestants can often be banished fairly early on, and I think in the previous 3 seasons of the Traitors UK, there's only been one non-white contestant in the finals. I suppose we should take that with a pinch of salt because the majority of the contestants are white, but even so, it's not that these people are all massive racists at all. It's not even that the show is. And actually the fact this does happen is perhaps what's most interesting about this show, because it points to the fact discrimination can occur whether you are overtly racist or not. This is subconscious here and systemic, and both interesting and important to see play out. Under enough stress, and that is key here, the desire for sameness becomes stronger than it normally would. Add to that, the format of this show is to keep banishing people, to keep voting certain players out, to keep ostracizing people, you know? When that's literally what you're supposed to be doing, it's unsurprising those aspects become so potent. You know, this kind of othering mentality isn't always what plays out in groups, isn't what all group dynamics are doomed to. Groups can definitely be a lot healthier than this, or can just operate in different forms, but because of the format of the show, I think we are likely to see this kind of thing a lot more. Adds to that, the question of who is a traitor is so much harder to ponder than the question, who don't I trust? Even though those are two different questions, they're very often confused as the same one, and even Claudia in a lot of her monologues keeps asking them who they personally trust. But you can trust someone and them still be a traitor. You can be friends with someone in this game and they're still a traitor. Trust is built on a lot of things. Sometimes sameness, but also empathy and personal friendships, and behaving in ways that are culturally deemed honourable, I suppose we could say. James in this season secretly steals a shield. It's not a traitor-like thing to do at all there, but it is dishonourable, and it is outside the established etiquette of how players are supposed to behave around shields, which is always one of the fun ironies in this show. The intense subconscious pressure that faithfuls must be selfless around shields should all democratically decide who gets one in a conversation that a traitor could manipulate, where instead the people who do selfishly steal a shield, even though that makes them much more likely to be a faithful, even though that's a faithful motivated decision, it's seen as dishonourable. I don't trust it. It's easier to think about who I don't trust than who might actually be a traitor, therefore there can be a tendency to vote for them as traitors. And so you end up in a game where often, regardless of whether or not it's traitorous behaviour, if it's odd behaviour, if it's different enough, it creates a lot of suspicion. Not every time, obviously, because the contestants aren't robots. We are still capable of thinking beyond the pressures of group dynamics, but under enough stress it becomes harder to. Our minds feel increasingly pressured with the task of relieving that stress rather than the primary task of finding traitors, and so subconsciously all your best intentions blur. The Traitors is a mess of a game with contestants constantly doing what appears to be the stupidest stuff, and half the appeal of this show is the audience getting to laugh at them or to shout at the TV in frustration. However, do not believe you would do any better when absorbed in that environment. I am under no illusion I'd be any good at this game, and this season we've even seen a psychologist in Ellie mostly appear pretty clueless. Looking in from the outside when you're not only given scope by the show, not only already know the answers, but also have the space to step away and reflect, aren't just constantly hounded by internal stresses and the pressures of the game, aren't having everybody around you constantly second guessing your most natural behaviour and being in that environment for several weeks without any real contact with the outside world. Good luck trying to think and behave sensibly in that environment. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Let me know what factors I didn't mention, because there are always more. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe, maybe support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thafy, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.